Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Carrie Hazley. Today is April 30th. There are multiple ways on the screen that you can get a hold of us if you need weather information. The first is to call the Alaska Weather Information Line at 1-800-472-0391. You can also find us on the web at weather.gov/Alaska. And lastly, you can email me anytime at carrie.hazley@noaa.gov. Well, it is spring and rivers across the state are continuing the breakup process. Here's a photo of the Kuskokwim River taken yesterday by a National Weather Service hydrologist as she departed Bethel to fly along the river and look at the status of the ice. And here to tell us more about the status of breakup across the state is hydrologist Crane Johnson.
And now, your 2020 Alaska River Watch update.
Hey, good evening. This is Crane Johnson with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, bringing you your Alaska breakup outlook for Thursday, April 30th, 2020. Just a quick look at snowpack conditions around the state. We've got above average snowpack throughout the state of Alaska. And then if we look upstream into the Yukon Territory, we see shades of blue there as well, indicating above average snowpack across the Yukon, upper Yukon watershed. While we have seen snow start to melt at lower elevations, there's still plenty of snow in the mountains around Alaska and the Yukon Territory. Ice conditions for the months of March and April indicate that we went into breakup with near normal ice conditions. The one thing that we've tried to highlight this year is that conditions this spring are different than the last 4 or 6 winters. Those years we generally had warmer than average winters and thinner than normal ice going into breakup. We expect breakup and have seen breakup to be different than the last 5 or 6 years. As I mentioned, this year is different. We are trending towards a dynamic breakup. On the systems we've seen break up already, and we expect that to continue on systems such as the Kuskokwim and Yukon that have yet to break up. Typically during dynamic breakups, these are when we have ice jams that form and release, and these are the years when we can get flooding in our communities. The last 5 or 6 years we've had generally thermal breakups with the ice just rotting in place, a slush out, no significant ice jams formed during those years, 2014 to about 2019. We have to go back to about 2013 for the last year with dynamic breakup in our state. A quick look at recent temperatures. The bottom left plot shows Bethel, and we can see that well above average temperatures about 2 weeks ago, and then trending towards average currently. And then the forecast shows again a rise in temperatures with above average temperatures expected later in the weekend, and then trending normal temperatures through the next week or so. The one thing to really highlight that kicked off breakup along the Kuskokwim are the low temperatures were above the daily highs for a few days about a week or so ago. If we look at the plot in the upper right, a little bit of a different story. We can see that in the Fairbanks area we had above average temperatures about 2 weeks ago, and that combined with rain on snow, we had widespread runoff and rivers, smaller to mid-sized rivers breaking up throughout the interior. Recently, temperatures have been below average, and the forecast we see is below average temperatures for the next few days and then trending towards average temperatures over the next week or two. This has put a pause on breakup in the interior, with the smaller rivers and medium-sized rivers generally being ice-free, but the larger rivers such as the Yukon, the Koyukuk, still have solid ice cover with no breakup progression at this point. A look at our breakup map as of this morning. Always go to www.weather.gov/APRFC for the latest breakup map. We can see that the one thing to really highlight are the breakup has begun on the Kuskokwim River. Earlier this week there were ice jams with minor flooding in Sleet Mute and Red Devil, and currently as of Thursday morning there was an ice jam in Napai Mute with flooding in Napai Mute. A flood watch has been issued for Aniak, Kalskag, Tuluksuk, and AKwx, areas downstream of Napai Mute, We expect that ice jam to release at some point, and there's potential for additional ice jams to form downstream. And so a flood watch has been issued for those communities. For the latest flood watches, warnings, and advisories, always visit our website. Other breakup happenings over the past week. Nenana Ice Classic, the Tanana River at Nenana broke up earlier in the week. And then we've had some minor ice jams along the Chena River. Most of those have cleared out, but we still expect a significant rise in river levels on the Chena due to snowmelt in the next week or two. We've had some minor ice jams along the Tanana River with minor flooding reported as well. And then as I mentioned, along the Yukon and the Koyukuk rivers, we had significant runoff and river levels rise, but those have stabilized and river levels and ice levels have dropped recently in the last few days in response to these colder temperatures, which can be a good thing for those two rivers. We see the river ice begin to lose strength, and if that continues, we could trend more towards a thermal breakup in some reaches with some areas of dynamic as well. As I mentioned, the Yukon, no significant breakups yet. We're still waiting for Dawson City to break up and the breakup front to work its way into the U.S. I want to mention that the Riverwatch team is out in the Kuskokwim. They did their first flight yesterday from Bethel up to Napaimute and are reporting back to communities on local river and ice conditions. One thing they noted were that water levels this year throughout the Kuskokwim were higher than normal. On my left is the river gauge in Bethel and just shows a steady progression of water levels over the last week. And I did mention there's a flood watch in effect for communities downstream from Napaimute, and to always check our website for the latest products. A quick look at the Kuskokwim. This was from Civil Air Patrol on the 26th of April, and one thing we want to do is thank all the pilots out there that have provided photos this year. Pilots, local community members, and folks up and down the river has been extremely helpful this year. Quick look at the Yukon River at Dawson last week on the 22nd, and then we see quite a bit of change between now and the 29th. And we'll give you one final look at the Kuskokwim down in Bethel. We can see ice is still in place just in front of the community there. For the latest conditions, always visit www.weather.gov/APRFC.
All right, thank you for that, Crane. Now, we do have one flood watch in effect for the Kuskokwim River, and that extends from Sleepmute all the way out to the coast at this point. However, the communities of greatest concern for the short term are Aniak and Kauskag, just based on where that breakup front is moving along the river there. And then we will continue to update this product as we get new information from our Riverwatch crew that is flying out along the Kuskokwim today and again tomorrow. This product, however, valid until Saturday afternoon. No other advisories, watches, or warnings are in effect across the rest of the state of Alaska today. Now, as far as the weather goes today, we do have a fairly active pattern out over the Bering and the Aleutians, with low pressure dominating the weather over the far western part of the Aleutians and a dying frontal boundary stretching its way into the central Aleutians. Some snow mixing in with that system out there, and then we see some rain as we get a bit further towards the central and the eastern part of the Aleutians. Over the Panhandle, active weather persists there as well, as they're seeing showers, and then up over some of the higher terrain, they might even see a bit of some snow mixing in, although down at all of the community levels, it should all be in the form of rain. Generally, dry weather across mainland Alaska, a few passing clouds, although not seeing any large areas of precipitation today, and that'll be the case across mainland Alaska through the overnight hours as well. We will see maybe some scattered showers out along the Gulf Coast as we go through the overnight hours, Prince William Sound down towards southeast. Could see a few snow showers mixing in at higher elevations, rain down in the local areas with the communities. And then out along the Aleutians, we're also going to look for continued wet weather with some snow mixing into the precipitation out along all of the western part of the Aleutians. Now, for the day on Friday, that active pattern persists out along the Aleutians and over the Bering. Again, some snow showers mixing into the precipitation we're getting there. We could also see a few scattered showers pass their way through AKwx tomorrow as a frontal boundary that dies out passes through the area. Also, a few lingering showers out along the Gulf Coast, particularly over the eastern Kenai Peninsula and parts of Prince William Sound, and also a few lingering showers over the southern part of the Panhandle tomorrow. We want to look ahead, though, to a system that's down over the North Pacific and pushing its way towards the Panhandle for the day on Saturday, where we will get another shot of rain late in the day Saturday and then continuing into the weekend. The rest of the state, though, for Saturday looks to see pretty good weather with high pressure dominating over most of the state. We could see some some clouds move in to places that are used to seeing the sun, although precipitation not expected to come with them. And then scattered rain showers likely all along the Aleutians for the day on Saturday. Now, as far as temperatures are concerned, with clear skies over a good portion of the Arctic due to high pressure, we are seeing very cold overnight lows. So to start the day off tomorrow, we will look for a low of 0, a dead horse 2 over at Arctic Village, and then out along the west coast, an overnight low tonight of 11 at Kotzebue, down towards Nome up to 23, 25 at Bethel. For south central Alaska, temperatures will hover with the freezing level there. Could see some temperatures getting just below freezing, although most of them should stay just above it. Down at Kodiak, 36 for an overnight low, and then down over the Panhandle, we'll look for temperatures to stay in the upper 30s to right around 40. For tomorrow, 40s across much of southwestern mainland Alaska. Cool temperatures up on the Arctic, though, where we'll see 9 degrees for a high at Ukuyagvik and 9 degrees for a high at Dead Horse tomorrow. Temperatures in the upper 40s across the Panhandle and much of the interior. Continued cold as we go into the Saturday overnight hours, where we'll see single digits to low teens up on the Arctic coast, and then out along parts of the west coast, temperatures in the upper 20s, so staying below freezing. South central Alaska, southwest Alaska, you're going to flirt with the freezing point once again as we go through your Saturday, with temperatures very close to that 32 mark, and then temperatures in the mid-30s down over the Panhandle. For highs on Saturday, we will look for good recovery with temperatures in the 40s to 50s across much of mainland.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Okay, moving into Friday morning's aviation graphic, IFR North Slope and the Arctic coast. Becoming marginal for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, VFR in the interior, and IFR from the Gulf of Alaska on up to the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, kind of cutting off in the coast range with some marginal VFR slipping on up into the eastern and central Copper River Basin. Cook Inlet westward to the Yukon Delta stays VFR, IFR along the southwest coast to St. Lawrence Island, and a batch of IFR out over the southwest Bering Sea along and just north of the Aleutians. And the Alaska Peninsula not too shabby on the western end with VFR and marginal VFR along the Panhandle on the outer coast. And for the afternoon, that improved somewhat, but marginal VFR still persists along the coast of Prince of Wales Island. Marginal VFR, eastern or North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. VFR in the interior, marginal for the North Slope and Arctic coast, and a zone of IFR there along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area, Nunivak Island, on into Bristol Bay, marginal for the Alaska Peninsula, Aleutians, and the Bering Sea. From there, for Saturday morning, IFR, eastern central Arctic coast, IFR grazing the coastline from St. Lawrence Island down along the Yukon and to a lesser extent Kuskokwim Delta coast, and looks like the north coast of Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, but not quite making it to King Salmon, but will be marginal from King Salmon across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR, Cook Inlet IFR, and this is Sitna Valley. Much of the interior looking good, southern Panhandle kind of marginal, and the western Aleutians have some IFR just slipping on up into Shimei and Attu. And that'll not quite make it thereafter for Saturday afternoon, marginal VFR for the just about all the Aleutian chain with a little bit of VFR mixed in. Interior stays nice, VFR, IFR possible, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and a narrow band of IFR from Savunga on down to Macoriac, and then into the Bristol Bay area, southwest Bering, but really staying off the coast, and a zone of marginal VFR possible in the central Panhandle. Otherwise looking good, VFR conditions, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and northern Kodiak Island. Moving on to passes, Anatuvik for Friday, VFR, either entrance at Adigan, north and south entrance, approaches VFR, Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, rainy VFR, and windy also VFR. Isabel looking good. Mentasta open. Tanita VFR. And for the Portage area, VFR. Maybe some marginal on the eastern entrance. That's just a possibility. And for Chilkoot and White, it's pretty good VFR flying. Freezing level 2,000 feet there over the southwest interior, although otherwise not much to look at. We've got 2,000 feet in across the Panhandle, 4,000 feet well to the south. at the surface. Perlofts coming in across Cape Newenham, just inland of the North Gulf Coast and right along the eastern border of the Panhandle. Moving on to icing. Possibility of some icing over the eastern Alaska range. Northway Tok, Nebezna, possibly as far south as the north side of the Wrangell Mountains. Otherwise, the interior pretty well icing free, with better chances or just a threat of some icing for the Alaska Peninsula. None moderate at all, just probably light at that, of mixed varieties icing for the eastern Aleutians, central Aleutians, and to a lesser extent out to the west. Moving on to the jet stream, upper level ridging, Chukchi Sea, extending in across, well, much of the north slope with a east-northeast flow, 60-70 knots along the Brooks Range, into the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. Elongated trough over the central southern Bering Sea, with the main jet along and south of the Aleutians, anywhere from 60 to 70 knots. And another flow coming up from the south and southeast with a system there west of the Queen Charlottes and across the Panhandle. 9,000 feet, low pressure over the Bering Sea. Pretty light wind flow, variable 5 to 10 over the interior. Westerlies 30 to 35 for the western Aleutians. Winds on the increase off the south coast of the Panhandle in the afternoon. About 20 knots from the southeast there on Friday. Turbulence, possibly southern Panhandle, western Aleutians.
Hey there, star friends. Trace here, and you're gonna be so excited. Let's just kick into this. Here's our sky at 8 p.m. this week. Okay, take a second to look at Orion's top left star. That is Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse is a red supergiant. It's about 600 light years from us. It's usually the 10th brightest star in the sky, but right now, it's not even close. It's been dimming. Why? Because it's going to explode into a supernova. That's right, fam. The astronomical community has a ton of theories as to why, but some believe supernova. Unfortunately, stars are indifferent to our puny human lifetime, so it might not explode for like 100,000 years. But whenever it does, we will have one of the greatest shows in all of astronomy. It would even be visible during the day, which means you should go outside, check the skies, and make sure it's still there while you keep looking up.
The beluga whale, also known as the white whale, lives in large groups and are unusual among whales. They have no dorsal fin, large bulbous heads, and they can actually swim backwards. To feed, they produce sound to find and hunt fish and invertebrates, and they use sound to communicate.
They're also known as the canaries of the sea because they make such a diversity of noises. They make chirps and whistles and gurgles and trumpeting sounds. They just make all kinds of sounds.
In the U.S., beluga whales live in the cold waters of Alaska, and there are 5 separate populations. Of those 5, the Cook Inlet population is the smallest, and has declined by about 75%. Subsistence hunting may have contributed to this initial population drop, but this practice was regulated starting in 1999, with the last hunt in 2005. Still, the beluga population here has yet to recover.
We listed Cook Inlet beluga whales as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act in 2008, and we had hoped that the population would start recovering, but we are still seeing a continued decline. And these beluga whales are only found in Cook Inlet, so if they go extinct, we don't think any other belugas will come back and populate this area.
These whales spend most of their summer near Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, where threats to belugas are on the rise as the city grows. These may include diminishing food, habitat loss or destruction, pollution, toxins, and human-caused noise, which hampers their ability to feed and communicate. Researchers are trying to understand which of these threats may be impacting them most, but Cook Inlet is a tough place to work.
It's really hostile for research. We have the strong tides, which makes it challenging for human safety, and we can't see through the water. It is very muddy, so we're pretty much limited to the part of the animal that breaks the surface of the water. And as a result, we have limited information about the specific population dynamics of Cook and the beluga whales.
Up until recently, information has mainly come from annual aerial surveys from aircraft and boat or shore-based photo identification surveys that use unique markings to tell animals apart. Scientists also use passive acoustics to listen for belugas, but none of these methods can detect much information about their health.
So it's really been a game changer with the whole species in the spotlight designation. We've gotten more resources within our agency.
For instance, we're able to use a drone to collect some aerial imagery of belugas in the wild, and we're hoping to learn some information about the age classes, information about the health status.
And probably the most important bit of information that we'll get out of that is we'll be able to identify the new calves. And we're hoping if we keep doing this every year, we'll be able to get an estimate of calf production every year that will tell us something about how well the population's doing.
We are also expanding upon our biopsy studies, hopefully to give us some information about sex, the individual's reproductive status, some genetic information, some contaminant loads.
Public and private partners are contributing as well. Some are looking at toxin levels in the whale's prey, while others are analyzing beluga teeth to learn about their age and past diet. Others monitor water quality and how belugas react to boats, and more check to see if their behavior changes with increased background noise. All of these findings will go toward developing effective recovery strategies for this population.
As for what you can do, if you're out boating, give belugas space. Don't drive right up next to them. Stay about 100 yards away. If you're flying over them, just remember that you're putting noise into the water as well, and so stay at least 1,500 feet above them. Report a stranded beluga whale as soon as possible, and that's if they're dead stranded or live stranded. The amount of information that we can learn from these animals by responding to a stranding is monumental, and it will help our efforts to recover them.
Together we can help beluga whales thrive in the dynamic waters of Cook Inlet. With continued research and good stewardship, we hope to see this population grow in the years to come.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back now. Let's take a look at marine weather conditions across the state of Alaska. Starting off first though with a look at the sea ice conditions. So we've got the statewide image here, and we do see continued retreat of some of the ice around the south and west coast as polynyas continue to open up with warming water and warming temperatures. With winds that are primarily out of the north over much of the ice pack, we will actually see the main ice edge shift a bit to the south, maybe 20 to 30 miles between now and Monday, but again continue to see at least some melting, particularly on those south and west coasts. Now, as far as marine weather conditions go down over the Panhandle, starting the day on Friday, we will look for winds to be primarily out of the north over part of the interior waters, and then at the extreme southern part of the Panhandle, winds out of the south, staying pretty light, 10 knots with seas up to 2 feet. Out along the outer coast, we'll look for winds to be primarily out of the south to southeast, and ranging between 10 and 15 knots in the north and down to about 20 knots in the southern part of the area there, with seas up to about 7 feet. Now, as that weather system approaches on Saturday, we will see a shift in the wind directions, and we will see the seas also start to pick up a bit. So on the outer coast, we will see winds now coming out of the north and east, and we'll see a range from 15 knots in the Yakutat area up to 25 knots once you get down in the southern part of Alaska waters. For the interior areas, we'll see a bit of a pickup in the wind speeds there as well, up to about 15 knots in most places, and seas ranging from 2 to 4 feet with the highest seas in the southern part of the area there. Now moving around to south central Alaska and starting off with a look at Cook Inlet, winds out of the east for Friday up to about 10, and then we'll look for seas across most of Cook Inlet to be up to about 2 feet, the exception there, the southern part of the inlet where it's a little bit less protected. So winds still out of the east up to 15 knots there, seas up to about 4 feet, and then over around in the northern part of the Gulf, winds out of the east for Friday with seas up to about 5 feet. Into Saturday, we see a bit of a shift in the wind direction. That is, we see that area of low pressure work its way into the Gulf of Alaska, so winds come more out of the north in a lot of places. We'll still see seas over the inlet there between 2 and 3 feet, and then over the northern part of the Gulf, northerly winds and seas up to about 6 feet at their highest. Moving further west now, taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula area and Kodiak Island. For your Friday, we will look for winds around Kodiak to be primarily out of the southeast, northeast up to about 15 knots in most places. And then moving further out the Alaska Peninsula there, variable in direction, so southeast on the Pacific side, northeast on the Bering side up to about 10 knots, and then a bit of a decrease as we go into the day on Saturday. Winds out of the northeast over much of the area, including Bristol Bay, and in open water there we'll look for seas up to about 2 feet. Closer to Kodiak Island, we'll see 15-knot winds on Saturday. Still out of the northeast and seas up to about 6 feet. On out the Aleutian chain for your Friday, we do see a bit of a pickup in the winds and the waves on the Pacific side as another area of low pressure will work its way out along the Aleutian chain into the Friday time frame. So the furthest west the Aleutians are going to be, or furthest west out along the Aleutians, we will look for 30-knot winds and seas in the range of 10 to 12 feet. Over towards the central Aleutians there, especially on the Pacific side, winds have more of a southerly component to them, so southwest, up to about 25 knots with seas peaking out at about 11 feet. On the Bering side there, winds out of the south, and then we'll look for seas there to be up to about 5 feet. Bit of a decrease on Saturday as the weather systems out in the area begin to weaken. Far western part of the Aleutians, seas 4 feet, and winds up to about 15 knots. There in the central part of the Aleutians, we see a mostly northerly component to the winds, and then a range from about 10 to 20 knots, depending on whether you're on the Bering side or the Pacific side, where things will be a bit stronger. And then on the Pacific side, seas up to about 9 feet. So further up the coast along the sea ice edge for Friday, winds generally out of the south in some places, and then once you get a bit further to the west, we'll see winds more out of the north. That's why we're seeing some of that sea ice edge shifting south as we go through the coming days, winds ranging between 10 and 15, and then weakening as we go into Saturday with a northeasterly component, again going to push that sea ice edge more to the south and west, winds up to about 10 knots. And then up on the Arctic coast, we're still dealing with just sea ice, so we're not really looking at anything in terms of waves. So for the Friday along the Arctic coast, we will look for winds to be up to about 10 knots out of the west, and then out along the west coast, a bit variable in direction, but also 10 to 15 knots there. Not much change at all as we go into the day on Saturday up on the Arctic again. Winds out of the west 10 to 15 knots, and then primarily out of the east once you get further west down the coast, and again about 10 knots once you get over towards Kotzebue Sound. Winds out of the north, and again at right around 10 knots.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.